Let's talk about the fairness doctrine and the state decisis. How do you say that?
Stare decisis. Uh,
Stare decisis.
stare decisis. Stare decisis. I feel like I'm saying that wrong. I should know. Um, it's Latin. I don't know what it means in Latin, but it's basically precedent. And it just speaks to the utter corruption of our Supreme Court. I don't even. It doesn't initially look like corruption. It just looks like it looked like we have three appointees under Trump. One genuine textualist who's like words mean literally what they mean in the dictionary, and that is how I make decisions on what the law is. And then we've got Kavanaugh, who that was Gorsuch. Kavanaugh's, probably a little more conservative than I would like, but I don't know that his tenure as a justice has been highly suspect. Comey Barrett is absolutely like a little bit of a religious nutjob. I don't know that I really want someone that entrenched in religion deciding what the country has to do. And Alito is absolutely in that same camp. So with Roe, they come out and basically just say, let me take a step back. Okay, so you've got branches of government that have independent authority to do X, Y, and Z, and they have checks over each other, and they have powers that inherently balance each other. Um, the executive branch's ability to affect how the law is enforced is a check on the legislature saying, or is a balance on the legislature passing the laws. But there's also a check in the form of a veto on the passage of laws as a whole. There are fewer checks and balances, I believe, on the Supreme Court uh, because they serve for, well, they ultimately serve as long as they live, I suppose, because they really don't get impeached, and I think the term used is so long as they have good behavior or something like that. What I'm getting at here is, but it also has the fewest teeth. It can't really do anything. It can't. The legislature can subpoena people and impeach people, and the president can literally is the head of the judicial, or the, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, the attorney general. That department can't think of it. It's too late here. The Supreme Court really doesn't have a lot of teeth. They don't have. They basically give opinions, and we use their opinions, but their opinions are meaningless if we don't treat them as legitimate. There's a good example of this. I cannot remember the case or the time, but it's the Trail of Tears and Andrew Jackson, and him basically just moving all the Indians from like Florida and Georgia to Oklahoma, and the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. And he was like, got it. We've heard what you have to say. Let's see you enforce it. And obviously they can't. They can't do anything. Um, they ultimately are subject to a perception from the public that they are acting within their own authority. Their authority comes from our deference to them. And so, in addition to that, they have to cultivate consistency within themselves over time. And you end up with all these concepts that have developed through common law, ultimately from England, leading to precedent basically being its own authority. So, because in the past we have decided this on this issue, this is the law now. And the way they get around that, and that's got a hierarchy to it, right? So, your court levels all the way up. The way you can get around that is you try and distinguish the facts of your specific circumstance from the existing law. Uh, and maybe they argue that it is the same, and you go all the way to the top, and they either say, no, this has been settled, or they say, yeah, you're right, this is slightly different. So in the future, if a situation is this, but it has this exception, that is how it will be handled, right? But what they don't do is say, this is what we've decided at the highest level, and then 50 years later say, actually, we are changing our mind. They don't do that because ultimately it undermines all of their authority to do so. The ultimate result of that is now it is a political institution,
Okay.
explicitly political institution. Now, whoever has the majority, whatever the majority of thought, I mean, in 10 years, what is Roe back? Do we just change it back? Do we just keep changing it? It's a really problematic thing when you're the appearance of authority, the reality of your authority comes from you being consistent internally, giving people the impression that because you have decided it is law, it is law. But now that's completely undermined. That's completely gone. And then in addition to that, in quick succession, right afterwards, they passed or they decided several cases, one of which bribes are okay, basically, as long as you don't say it's a bribe. The president is immune from oversight as long as it is something he's doing officially as president. And also, if you think it's not official, you are not allowed to question whether it was official. Basically, the president is immune as long as you can make any argument at all that it had anything to do with being the president. And then the last one that they wrapped up with was Chevron, which is not as interesting, but administrative law, Chevron doctrine. There's two or three of these cases actually, but I think we all refer to it as Chevron. Is about administrative agencies and deference. This is a 1980, 85, something like that case about administrative agencies if they have been explicitly given authority that was contemplated by the legislature when passing the statute, their interpretation of what the statute says is not subject to judicial interpretation. So, like, okay, the EPA passes a Clean Air Act, whatever, but they have these things that are going to be done, but that act is executed by the executive branch. And the executive branch will have an agency that is probably authorized by the act, and the officials of that agency, every minute detail is not laid out in terms of how this act will be affected. So there is discretion in terms of how it's enacted by an official who has delegated the authority of the executive branch to do so. And there's a lot of other facets to this. So, like, totally encourage you to read up on the Chevron doctrine. There's a whole thing about like how they make rules and whether or not people have the opportunity to comment on those rules. But the takeaway here is because of that structure, the courts do not get to come back in and say, actually, we disagree that that's the best way to do this, and you have to do it this way. And the premise is that, the people who are working as officers of the presidency are put in those positions for a reason. There's just delegations of authority to this point because the president or it's really an exception to the concept that the Supreme Court ultimately interprets what the Congress says. And there are a bunch of caveats to which situations apply, but ultimately it has to do with whether or not it's like contemplated or that it was intentionally left vague or whatnot. And basically they just came out and after 45 years for like 35 years for like, actually, nope, we
You
decide.
talking? You're specifically bringing this up due to Roe v. Wade?
No, I'm saying no. Roe was just the first. I was really talking about four different cases that have all happened in the last 2 years.
So
Chevron
they
getting
just
overturned, the presidential immunity case, the bribery is okay case. I can get you the actual case names for these, and Roe. Uh, they're all just like completely. The immunity and the bribery cases, in particular, are just so incredibly backwards interpretations of the law. Like on their face, they're just incorrect. The implications are even scarier. So basically, the Supreme Court's been under a lot of negative attention for all of their acceptance of gifts and how lubed up their lives appear. Well, we'll just decide that bribery is okay. The president's under investigation for all of his attempts to overthrow the government and subvert democracy. Yeah, well, we'll just decide the president's immune.
And they're doing this because it's 6-3, right? And Trump put in 3 of them.
Yeah, oh, man, I guess the way conceptualizing that is even harder. It's crazy how no one seems to have any I've never heard a Republican complain that it was bullshit that we just didn't like it's expressly authorized that the president appoints Supreme Court justices and they get a hearing in the Senate for confirmation. So when Ginsburg died and there was a year left in Barack Obama's last term, and Mitch McConnell just said we're not going to hold because he's the leader of the Senate, I believe. So he has to call the vote. And he was like, I'm just not going to call it. We're just not going to have a vote. So we just had 8 justices for a little while.
And they did
I
that because
think
they wanted to wait.
I had that backwards. It wasn't Ginsburg. It was might have been Scalia. Can't remember. But Ginsburg died under Trump
And he
with a
replaced
month
him.
with a month left in his presidency.
And they just quickly did it to get him in.
Yeah.
Didn't-
Oh,
yeah.
and because they had power of the Senate again, and they ruled that they had the reasoning he gave, which is just pulled out of thin air, was we should let the American people decide who they want to appoint the next justice. No, we should let the American people decide who they want the president to appoint during his term. But this opening occurred in this term. Well, the rules all changed when it had flipped, and so, yeah, a lot of people would argue that a seat was stolen, right? But it's bigger than that. I really think that the current Chief Justice, John Roberts, cares a lot about. Whenever we refer to courts and law, we refer to them by the name of the Chief Justice: the Roberts Court, the Warren Court, the Rehnquist Court. Roberts cares a lot about how his court is perceived. I would tell you, is very, very conservative. Was on the legal team fighting for Bush in the Florida dispute about recounting when it was Bush v. Gore. Bush v. Gore is like a huge political milestone in the Supreme Court. He ends up taking over. Bush appoints him, right? But I think he has really threaded the needle in promoting the form of American jurisprudence that he wants to, and tried to avoid the impression of impropriety wherever possible while still doing so. I will say that I think most of this started in motion with Citizens United, and you can read about that as well. That's basically the case that decided that there are limits on anonymous donations to political candidates, but not corporations, and that not corporations' donations to political candidates. And that occurred because John Roberts decided corporations are people and speech is protected by the First Amendment. Therefore, corporations can donate money to political candidates without disclosing who donated money to them. So you have a bunch of people who would donate money to a political action committee, a PAC or a super PAC, and they will in turn donate money to the candidates that they want. So basically, we have all these candidates who are funded, and we don't know who funded them.
Okay.
That all happened because John Roberts said corporations are people. All of this to say, if the court was made up closer, if it was 5-4, I think none of these decisions happen. Because I think John Roberts, because if you're, okay, so if the Chief Justice is in the majority, he decides, this is kind of backwards of how it works. Like you propose writing an opinion and they sign on to it or not. That's how you get the majority opinion, concurrences, and dissents. But if he is in the majority, he decides who writes it, the details, and he can decide to write it himself. So Yeah, I mean, some of the more contentious cases under Barack Obama, for example, with the Affordable Care Act being, we talked about Commerce Clause for a little bit there, and the federal government can regulate commerce as it crosses state lines. Can it regulate commerce that doesn't actually exist by requiring it to exist and then regulate it? That was the question with forcing people to buy healthcare. Does the federal government have the authority to force you to buy something and then punish you for not buying it? That was the issue, and John Roberts basically said it is okay, but it's okay because this is actually a tax, which is not an argument that they were really making, if I recall correctly. He just wanted to kind of thread the needle, and I just can't see any of these recent. I can't see Roberts overturning Roe. I mean, I don't think the majority of the big money in the Republican Party wanted to overturn Roe. That's the dog catching the car. You don't want that. You want to keep people afraid of the thing that you say is the greatest evil. You don't want to get rid of the greatest evil because then what are people going to be mad about? Well, now it's immigrants. But the alternative is now you've motivated a bunch of other people to vote against you who
Right.
previously weren't motivated. I don't think that his big money donors, the handlers of the Republican Party, if you will, if we're following this type of reasoning, right, wanted that. I don't think this is the type of thing that would have happened. But he could vote against it all he wants now. There's 5 conservative justices without him.
And is it
And
important to him, like, even if, are you saying that, like, maybe he would vote against what he knows the other five will do just so that the record will show that he voted against it?
no, no, he's going to vote with them. But I'm saying if there were 4 conservatives and 4 liberals, he might vote with the conservatives, but make sure he writes it and write it way less inflammatory
Why would he do that if he's super conservative?
because it's his legacy. Like,
So do you think he's not happy with all this because his legacy is going to, I mean, look like,
I mean, I don't know. It could go either way. You could also interpret it as like we're not blaming him for it because it's going to happen anyway. But this will be known as the Roberts Court, and the Roberts Court will be known as the court that did all this crazy bullshit that no one thought was legitimate. And
that's what I'm saying. Do
and
you think
there
he's kind of
there
upset about that?
yeah, I imagine he is. The abortion thing for Roe, that opinion was leaked well in advance, which is not normal.
Okay.
Not normal at all. Like a draft was released, and I think people speculated that it was one of the law clerks for Alito who authored it. I think Alito himself authored it or released it. I'm not really sure. There was a whole thing about the metadata being extractable, and you could tell who had done it. But purportedly, he was like really fighting against them on that subject because like that's a tough one to come back from. That's what you're known for now.
And do you think, I hate to ask, sometimes I feel like I'm asking you these tough questions and it puts you on the spot. And I don't want to do that, but,
No, you're fine. Ask away.
well, just, I don't need a huge answer, but do you think that if Kamala wins or whoever, that they'll just flip that back real quick? Like,
It's a really hard question to answer.
well,
I
actually,
I
it's not her decision, right? It's the Supreme Court's, and they, unless they change the voting,
it's kind of interesting, you know. In theory, yeah. It's well, you mean changing the decision back?
that's what I meant. But now that I think about it, she doesn't do it. It would have to be like if somebody died and she got a Democrat to
Well,
end it.
okay, so you could wait for one to die, right? And the 2 oldest, if I recall, are conservatives, but people live a long time now. You could pass a statute um, adding it to you could pass a statute or amend the Constitution. That's a pretty high bar. It's 75%, and states have to ratify. Statute you could probably pass with 60 senators, or so you'd probably have to try and throw out the filibuster. so you could pass it with a simple majority. I'm not entirely sure of how the rules around that work. Filibuster is not required by law, if I recall. I think it's just kind of a thing that we're accepting that the this is going to get super technical if I go too far. Um, but you could also move to expand the court because I can't recall if it explicitly says there has to be nine, um, and just add a bunch of seats. I don't know if she has the backing in the House and the Senate. In theory, if she's just able to remain, if she were to win and serve 2 terms, yeah, you probably waited out long enough that you can appoint a few more. Um, it's crazy too because I bet if Trump loses, I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised at all if he just runs again. It's not like he's almost running to avoid prosecution at this point, and it's not like you can tell him he's not going to run because he has the party by the balls, right? He's going to take his people with him and vote and run third party and split the ticket, and then they're going to lose. Uh, it's a pretty fascinating problem getting into bed with a crazy person. What I think is more interesting is with all of this passing this or with this opinion enshrining that official actions taken by the president are immune from prosecution. It sort of sounds like Kamala could take a lot of really dramatic actions if she wanted. You're the guys who said she could do it. I don't know what those look like. I don't know if that's investigations or because there's definitely some suspect things going on with several members of the court and where all their money is coming from because we know what they're paid, uh, and
Right.
gifts from kind of suspect people and
But this has been a thing
uh,
forever, right? I mean,
yeah, probably. I don't know that it has been to this scale, and I don't know that this scale of quote unquote bribery has been paired with this type of
yeah, I always think of the
ridiculous.
Clintons. Like the Clintons, they both were in office their whole lives, but yet they're like billionaires. Like,
Yeah, but they're not judges.
okay,
I'm talking about people giving money to a judge and then having a case that shows up before them.
yeah, okay,
And sure, you could make the argument that the principle's the same, but it's not. They serve for life.
that's true.
Um, and it's I don't know where you take that or what you do with that. That's just a thing to think about because the expansion of consolidated power in the executive branch is only good if your person's in power. Well, they might have just expanded power and then had the other parties can't. It would be a fascinating thing to watch unfold. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't think
Interesting
I'd want to
times
work.
though.
Yeah, it is. I wouldn't want to work that hard. I mean, I want to retire, you know?
What do you mean?
Well, how old are some of these Supreme Court justices?
There's at least two in their 70s. I think there's three in their 70s. I think Thomas, Alito, and Sotomayor, but I'm not really sure. Alito might be in his late 60s. I'm pretty sure he's in his 70s, though. I'm pretty sure
Um,
Thomas is like 77 or something.
I just mean that it seems like a hard job.